All right, good afternoon and welcome to our afternoon video. Today, I'd like to talk to you guys about when you get the voucher, what happens? What do you do? What happens with the housing search? How much time you have? And so I'm going to bring in some notes today to help you guys out. But before we do that, I'm going to switch screens real quick and do a few introductions if you don't mind. And so we see here, I am Jay. I am the owner of Section8Consulting.com. You can see me down here. I think if you look down to your right, and I'm going to move myself around a little bit. That way you can kind of watch me, plus talk about everything that's going on. You can see up here we have a phone number, we have a website, and also email. You can reach my office. I am a private solution consultant. I worked at the federal level for 26 years, though my information is not free. It does require an appointment. It is relatively inexpensive for those that need help. So I'm going to zoom out a little bit there. All right, let's bring in some notes and let's discuss what's going to happen here, guys. So first up, receiving a housing choice voucher is a major milestone, but it does not mean that you automatically have an apartment or that the housing authority is going to immediately start paying rent. That's because there are a few different processes you need to keep in mind. And look, guys, I know I talk quick, so these notes will also be in the comment section and the description to help you out. That's the whole point of notes, is that way you can go back and take a look at what we're discussing. So the voucher authorizes a household to search for an eligible rent unit. You will still find a willing landlord. You submit the required paperwork, which is your request for tenancy, and you obtain the housing authority's approval, provided you find that property, pass a HQI or housing quality inspection. Do keep in mind that sometimes those processes can take up to a month, okay, if there's a backlog. And then, of course, you execute the lease before the rental assistance begins, and you will be under a HAP or HAP contract. Number one, you attend the voucher briefing. So that can be in person, or you may request with a accommodation that you'll be able to do it by video or remotely if you have a disability or other good cause. Okay. Before issuing the voucher, the Public Housing Authority normally conducts a briefing explaining the following: your approved voucher bedroom size, meaning number of bedrooms you're permitted to get. Do keep in mind that that can vary depending on income and other things that you put in the application to qualify. The voucher assistance and expiration dates, where you may search for housing, the housing authority's payment standards, what you're willing to pay, how you share, what your share of the rent will be calculated as your rent responsibility, which will typically start around 30% of your income. And then, of course, the PHA will cover the other 70%, but that may change if you have a higher income and you may end up paying more. So beyond that, you have fair housing and reasonable accommodation rights. And I would advise looking at some of my other videos where I get into high detail of that, because there's roughly 140 different types of accommodation that could be requested. And there's also around evenly the same amount for those you can request from a landlord. Moving on from there, documents required when you find a unit. And again, the same documents you probably that I recommended in other videos you bring to the PHA are probably going to be the same landlord's going to want. Your obligations after leasing the unit, of course, that will be under your HAP contract. You should receive a briefing packet containing local instructions, forms, landlord information, and the housing authority's contact information. Depending on your local housing authority, that will vary greatly, okay? Not every housing authority is well collected. Moving on from there, HUD's current guidance explains the voucher issuance occurs after the PHA selects the household and verifies eligibility and completes the required briefing. HUD and housing search and leasing book will be linked up as I put in the notes here. Number two, your housing search deadline begins. Well, take a look at this. Your voucher will contain an expiration date. Federal rules generally require initial term of 60 calendar days. I want you to keep in mind, guys, you may receive a maximum of 6 months total, no matter how many requests you put in. So typically, a housing authority will allow you to request up to two more additional extensions beyond the original, and it may not exceed 6 months. Once you get a search time, and if you go in and ask for a second 60 days, you're going to find the third time extremely hard unless you could prove somehow mentally or physically or otherwise that your search time was materially affected because of some medical reason, okay? Moving from there, do not assume that every housing authority provides 90, 120, or 180 days. That can change. It can change by season and even the month. So it depends on funding and a lot of factors. Read the actual dates printed on the voucher, and also you may request the PHA or Public Housing Authority's administrative plan, and you may do that through a FOIA or Freedom of Information Act if they're being difficult. In many cases, you may be able to view that on our website. If you need additional time, here are some of the things you want to consider. Request an extension before your voucher expires. Typically, you want to start talking about that about 15 to 20 days before that voucher expires. Do not go out there like Cinderella at the stroke of midnight and think that you're somehow going to get them to magically agree to something, okay? Make a request in writing, of course. And when I say in writing, by email, or if you mail a request, make sure it has a tracking number. Explain your household search efforts and barriers. And so if you have difficulty, you're slow moving, and again, medical or otherwise issues that are medically related to that could slow you down. Attach a search log. Keep track of what you're doing so you can show that your efforts are fruitful or whether or not you're having a difficult time. And your landlord communications, application denials, and other supporting records are extremely important. I don't mean scribbling in a tablet with a Crayola, people. You need to keep notes. If the disability created the need or more time, or you need to request a reasonable accommodation, explain the connection between the disability related limitation and the extension request. Look, guys, sometimes I would really strongly advise almost 80% of the time to reach out to an office like mine, book an appointment, because a lot of you guys submit unreasonable requests for extensions. And so it needs to show proper nexus. So there's a little bit of legal language that needs to go in that. Moving on from there, an extension is not always automatic. The Housing Authority's administrative plan determines its ordinary extension policy, while federal law, disability laws may require an exception when additional time search is necessary for the reasonable accommodation. So you need to understand in principle those rules, and not most people are equipped with that kind of information. And the Housing Authority is not going to be forthwith most times in trying to help you beat their policies. Okay, number 3. Your search for an eligible rental unit. So tenant-based voucher may generally require to be used for eligible apartments, townhomes, duplexes, single-family, manufactured homes, and units where the family already lives. I have videos specifically about both topics. It covers all the different types of housing in one video, and in another, you'll also see that we link you up with actual real databases through the federal government, which will allow you to do that. There's only about 2 or 3 of them out there, and there's only about 2 additional third-party sites. All this stuff on Google, including ads, a lot of that stuff's fake, and they will get if you feed them your information, you'll end up with texts and calls and all kinds of crazy stuff that is not related to it, despite it saying they help with Section 8. They don't. These are actually con artists, okay? The landlord must be willing to participate, but the apartment must also satisfy the program requirements. Before paying an application fee, ask these following questions. Does the owner accept the Housing Choice Voucher? Is the unit available right now? What is the requested rent? If any utilities are included, and which ones you're required to pay? What are the security deposits and other fees? Will the owner complete the Housing Authority's paperwork, which means will they actually sign up to be a landlord? And is the owner willing to wait for the inspection for a rent approval? And so you need to let that landlord know. This could be anywhere from a week to up to 4 weeks, depending on circumstances and whether or not you're in a big metropolitan area with a lot of demand, okay? Does the unit appear to meet the applicable inspection standards? Look, you can't rent out somebody's basements that's in shambles, so you really need to be clear about what you're doing. If you don't do that, reach out to my office, okay? State and local source of income discrimination laws may prohibit certain landlords from rejecting an application merely because of the applicant's use of a housing voucher. However, you should go into this understanding a high level of difficulty, okay? Do not walk into this like it is going to be the yellow brick road, okay? You should expect probably 60 to 70% rejection, regardless of even that's on top of those willing to actually violate federal rules. So it's going to be difficult, but that's the point, okay? The payment standard does not equal the maximum rent. Just because the Housing Authority publishes a bunch of rent numbers doesn't mean that's actually what's going to be happening. So, payment standards come down to this. It's negotiable. And if they are lacking funding and other things, then they may choose to give lower payment standards. So you need to be crystal clear about what your budget's going to be. Same thing applies to landlords looking at the payment standard. Just because that's the window sticker price does not mean that's what they're actually doing. The payment standard is used to calculate the housing assistance payment and is and is not necessarily the following things: the maximum rent the landlord may request, the exact amount the housing authority will pay, the amount of rent a family can afford, or guarantee a unit that a unit will be rented at the approved amount. Okay, so in other words, when you're negotiating with the landlord for rent and you understand, make sure that you get a clear understanding from your PHA of whether or not that's going to be acceptable. The housing authority considers household income, adjusted monthly income, voucher bedroom size, applicable payment standard, contract rents, tenant paid utilities, utility allowances, gross rent, and whether the rent is reasonable compared to other similar assisted units. And I'm going to tell you exactly what they're going to do. They're going to go right to Google Maps. They're going to look at every house on that street or apartment or whatever it is, and whatever the average is going to be. So if you've got 10 houses and they're all $800, then the rent's going to be averaged at that. If you've got five, if you got half of them that are 2,000 and half that are 1,000, they're going to meet you in the middle. They're never going to give you the top tier number. So gross rent generally means the contract rent plus utility allowance for tenant paid utilities. You got to be hard up to find a lot of places, including utilities, simply because they don't actually kick in much for that, maybe $70, $80. So a lot of landlords don't even want to get involved in that game. At the initial occupancy, if the gross rent exceeds the applicable rent payment standard to household share, generally does not exceed 40%. I've heard a lot of people, oh, I'm paying 60%. No, that either means one, you're lying, or B, you simply don't understand the fundamentals of how this federal process works for housing. So it's 40% of the adjusted monthly income at highest, and that's under CFR 982.508. Okay, everything else is just gossip. A unit can therefore be denied even its advertised rent appears to be within the payment standard. It's still up to the PHA, regardless of the standard. Number 5, if you apply with the landlord, the voucher does not eliminate the landlord's regular screening process. The owner may still consider lawful screening factors such as rental history. Just because you have a voucher and you apply, or you even you're guaranteed under strict state laws saying they can't deny you, you still have to meet the landlord's requirements on the contract. They own the property, it is to their terms. So rental history, references, credit history, criminal activity, the ability to pay rent and tenant portions, and compliance with reasonable occupancy standards. Okay. So this is not a free pass into just anybody's property. Be very clear about that. The housing authority's approval for your program eligibility does not require a particular landlord to approve your rental application unless the landlord's refusal violates applicable fair housing laws, or if your state has a source of income law, and it has to be within the narrow definition or scope of that legally. Number 6, the landlord and family may submit a tenancy pact. Once the landlord agrees to proceed, the family and the owner may complete a request for tenancy or RTA, an approval commonly called RFTA or RTA. The packet will require the following: request for tenancy approval, proposed lease, the owner certification, which is them filling out the paperwork required, W-9 and tax information forms, proof of ownership, property management authorization, direct deposit information, utility information, lead-based paint disclosure, rent comparability information. In other words, they're going to be offering that AMI out there, area median income on average, all the locally required documents. And so there you are. Moving on there, submit a complete pack to keep a full copy, and missing signatures, inconsistent rent amounts, blank fields, or missing ownership records may delay the process and make it virtually impossible. Under federal rules, the voucher and the search term must be suspended for the date the family submits the request for tenancy until the PHA provides a written notice, approval, or denial for the request and confirm that the PHA recorded the submission and suspension correctly. And we're going to move on to the last part here. The housing authority reviews the proposed tenancy. The PHA reviews whether the following: the unit is eligible, the owner is eligible, the lease contains acceptable terms, the requested rent is reasonable, the household can afford its required share, the unit is the correct size and under the local subsidy standards, and tenancy complies with the program requirements. The necessary owner and tenant forms are complete. Okay, no blanks. The PHA may negotiate a lower rate to the owner, and the owner can accept or approve the rent or withdraw the unit, and sometimes some additional information for supporting the request amount. Okay, the landlord cannot privately charge a tenant additional rent that was not disclosed and approved by the housing authority and undisclosed. Here, let me make a highlight that undisclosed side payments violate program rules. So you're not going to be kicking in cash on the side. Okay. Number 8, the unit is inspected. The housing authority must determine the unit meets the applicable federal laws and local inspection requirements. Inspections commonly examine a few things: the work and smoke of carbon monoxide alarms, electricity and exposing wire, plumbing and water supply, heating, windows, doors, locks, structural conditions, trip and fall hazards, sanitation, infestation, lead. Shoot, this always gets me. Lead-based paint hazards, and appliances included with the tenancy, and emergency exits and other health and safety conditions as they see fit under the housing quality inspection. All right, number 9, the PHA approves the rent and tenancy. The approval requires all of the following: the tenancy's paperwork is complete, the unit passes inspection and qualifies under authorized inspection flexibility, the rent is reasonable, the family share is permitted, the lease complies with program requirements, the owner meets participation requirements. And then we move on to number 10. The lease and HAP contract are executed. 2 separate contractual relationships are created. Number 1, the tenant and landlord sign a lease. Number 2, the housing authority and the landlord execute the housing assistance payment contract. You want to know what HAP is? Housing assistance payment contract. So moving on from there, HUD and tenancy addendums becomes part of the lease. If the lease conflicts with the tenancy addendum, then HUD requires generally control. Do not move in early or sign a lease that obligates you to pay the full rent unless the PHA has clearly approved the arrangement. Assistance may not be covered for that period if it was unauthorized or before the effective date. There's a lot of people trying to rent and do things before you ever have approval. That's the best way to get yourself in trouble and for the whole thing to get shut down. So number 11, rental assistance begins after the final approval. The tenant pays the approved family share to the landlord. The housing authority pays the assistance payment directly to the landlord. The tenant remains responsible for any assigned utilities. The tenant may also owe an approved security deposit. The voucher does not ordinarily pay security deposits, application fees, moving expenses, utility deposits, the cost of new furniture or used furniture, unapproved landlord changes, rent owed before assistance contract owes. Remember, if they don't sign off on it and you go rent, then that is your money you just lost. Some PHAs and nonprofits and homeless programs and local governments may also offer separate assistance and deposits and moving costs. What they're talking about is a continuing care program, but that is not applicable for this video. Your responsibilities continue after move in. Once housed, the family must generally pay the tenant portion on time, follow the lease, permit required inspections. And again, they're not going to negotiate with you without those inspections and annual re-inspections. Complete the annual and interim recertifications. Report changes required by the PHA or Public Housing Authority. Obtain approval before adding house members. Notify the PHA before moving. Avoid serious and repeated lease violations. Avoid damaging the unit beyond ordinary wear. Provide truthful and complete information. The use of assisted units as the household's principal residence, and avoid unauthorized side payment arrangements. The PHA normally reexamines income and household composition periodically, meaning that's usually once a year, about every 6 months if they have the time, and inspect. And they also do the inspections for the units to the applicable requirements. So I think we've covered that pretty well. I'm not going to read any other parts because it's additional notes, and I don't want to make the video any longer than it needs to be. So I want to tell you guys, I appreciate y'all showing up today. Again, my phone number, my web address, and email to my office. Keep in mind, my office is a last solution. In other words, you tried all other efforts to resolve matters in your case or problems that you have. If those things have not yielded a fruitful result for you, then that would be a great time to reach out to my office. I'm not under government grants, therefore appointments must be booked and paid for. Again, my office is extremely inexpensive, but unfortunately, I do not offer services for free. Okay. I appreciate you guys joining me on this lovely Sunday, and just keep in mind, it may not be Sunday a week from now when it's later. Okay. So this video may be dated, depending on when it was published. Thank you for your time and enjoy your weekend.